Coca-Cola. Did you drink one today? Or yesterday? Maybe you're about to. This afternoon. Anywhere in Latin America, the odds are high. Billions of ice-cold bottles a year. Every city, every village, every little shop on every corner. And while you were on that corner buying it, there's a good chance you walked past, or walked into, a small red and yellow shop with 4 letters over the door. OXXO. OXXO. They're everywhere down there, as common as lampposts. Now here is a question you have almost certainly never asked in your life. That cold bottle of Coke in your hand, who actually filled it? Who mixed it and bottled it and capped it and put it on that shelf in front of you? And the answer is going to surprise you, because it was not the Coca-Cola company. Let me say that again, because it's the whole story. The famous American giant Coca-Cola did not fill your bottle. Across a huge part of the world, that job, the actual making of the drink you hold, is done by someone else entirely, by a family, one quiet family from one city in Mexico. And here is the strange part. This family is worth billions of dollars. They are among the richest people in all of Latin America, and you have almost certainly never heard their name. No famous faces, barely a photograph. They give no interviews. They simply fill your Coke, run the shop on your corner, collect a fortune, and stay completely invisible. This is World's Richest, so stay with me, because this is the story of the quietest rich family on Earth, hiding behind one of the loudest brands on Earth. First, let me show you how this actually works, because almost everyone gets it wrong. When you buy a Coke, you naturally assume that Coca-Cola, one single company, made the whole thing start to finish. It didn't. The Coca-Cola company, based in Atlanta, really only does 2 things. It guards the famous secret recipe, and it owns the brand, that red logo, that name. That's it. What it sells is a concentrate, the syrup, plus the right to use the name, and then it hands the rest, the enormous, unglamorous, back-breaking rest, to local partners in each part of the world. These partners are called bottlers, and the bottler is the one who does the real, sweaty work. Mixing the syrup with clean water and fizz, filling billions of bottles and cans, capping them, boxing them, loading the trucks, driving them down every last road to every last shop, keeping the coolers stocked and cold. Coca-Cola makes the magic powder and lends its famous name. The bottler builds the vast, grinding machine that turns that powder into an ice-cold drink in your actual hand. And this is the part that flips everything around. In Latin America, the giant American company is not even the boss of that machine. It's a junior partner in it. The Coca-Cola company owns only a minority slice of the bottler, roughly a quarter of it. The family owns and controls the rest. So on the ground, across a huge part of the world, Coca-Cola is the guest, and the family is the host. Atlanta supplies the syrup. The family owns the empire that pours it. And the single biggest Coca-Cola bottler in the entire world, by sheer volume, is a company owned and controlled by our quiet Mexican family. Their name is Garza Lagüera. Their company is called FEMSA. And through it, they run the largest Coca-Cola bottling operation on the planet, measured by how much they actually pour. Billions of bottles and cans a year, across Mexico, Brazil, Colombia, Argentina, and further still, all the way across the Pacific to the Philippines. Roughly 1 in every 10 Coca-Colas drunk anywhere in the world is filled by this one family's machines. Now, I have to be honest and careful with you here, because this is exactly where a lot of these secret billionaire stories quietly cheat, and I don't want to. FEMSA is not some hidden secret company. It's the opposite. It is a large public company. Its shares trade openly in Mexico City and in New York. Anyone in the world can buy a piece of it, and anyone can read its accounts. There's nothing secret about the business at all. What is hidden is the family, the people who own and control it. They are the ones who stay out of sight. So when I say the family nobody knows, I mean exactly that. Not a secret company, a secret family, sitting on top of a very public one. But wait, because filling the world's Coke is only half of this empire, maybe even less than half. Remember that little red and yellow corner shop, OXXO? That is theirs too, and OXXO is not a small thing at all. It is the largest chain of convenience stores in all of Latin America. More than 20,000 of them, just inside Mexico. Let that number sink in. 20,000 shops. There are towns where you can stand on one corner and see an OXXO, walk 5 minutes and find another. They sell you your morning coffee, your phone credit, your snacks, your cold drink, and increasingly, they're where people pay their bills and collect their money too. For millions of Mexicans, OXXO is simply woven into the fabric of ordinary daily life, and one quiet family owns almost every single one. And here is the detail that surprises even people who follow business closely. Those humble little corner shops, all added together, actually bring the family more money than bottling all that Coca-Cola does. Think about that. The world-famous, world-beating Coke operation, and it's the boring little corner store that quietly out-earns it. The bottling is the famous part. But the shop on the corner is the real crown jewel. This family got rich twice over from the same simple idea: sell small, cheap, everyday things, but sell an absolutely staggering number of them. So before we go on, let me plant a puzzle in your mind. I'll answer it later, I promise. If FEMSA is a public company, if its shares trade freely, for anyone to buy, then how does one quiet family keep such a tight, unbreakable grip on it? How do you control something that, on paper, belongs to thousands of strangers? Hold that question. It has a very clever answer. To find it, we have to go back. Not a few decades, more than 130 years. The year is 1890. The place is Monterrey, a tough, hot, hard-working industrial city in the north of Mexico, and a group of local families, among them the Garzas and the Sadas, get together and start a brewery. They call it Cuauhtémoc, and they begin making beer. And right from the start, they had a particular kind of cleverness. The exact same patient, build-it-yourself instinct you'll see run through this whole family for 100 years. To make their beer, they needed glass bottles. So rather than buy them from someone else, they built their own glass factory. They needed steel for bottle caps and for machinery, so they built their own steel mill. They needed malt, so they made their own malt. Everything the brewery depended on, they decided to own themselves, top to bottom. And do you see what happens next? Each of those side businesses, the glass, the steel, the rest, grew into a giant company in its own right. Step by step, bottle by bottle, this one brewery in one northern city spread outward into a sprawling industrial empire, one of the largest in all of Mexico. The Garza and Sada families became something close to royalty in Monterrey. Not flashy royalty, not loud, quiet, serious, and enormously powerful royalty, the families who quietly built the industrial backbone of a whole region. And at the head of this dynasty, for many years, stood a remarkable man. His name was Eugenio Garza Sada. Remember that name carefully, Garza Sada, because in a moment there is going to be another, almost identical name, and I don't want you to mix them up. Eugenio Garza Sada was an engineer trained at one of the finest universities in America. He was a builder of factories, and he was a genuine, large-hearted philanthropist. He took the family's growing fortune and poured a great deal of it straight back into his city. His crowning gift was a great university, the Tec de Monterrey, which he helped found and which still educates tens of thousands of Mexicans to this day. He was, quite simply, one of the most respected and beloved men in the whole country. And now I have to tell you a hard and painful part of this story. I'm going to tell it plainly and with respect because it really happened, and it left a scar on an entire nation. On a September morning in 1973, Eugenio Garza Sada was being driven to work, as he was every day, and on the way, his car was ambushed by a group of armed men, guerrillas, who intended to kidnap him and hold him for ransom. He did not go quietly. He resisted them. And in the terrible violence that followed, Eugenio Garza Sada was killed. So were two of the men whose job it was to protect him. It sent a wave of shock and grief through the whole of Mexico. One of the country's most admired figures, gunned down on the streets of his own city. It was a wound in the national memory that, in many ways, never fully healed. I won't linger on it, out of respect for the man and for the people who loved him. But you cannot understand this family without knowing it happened. It is the pivot on which their whole story turns. Because from that single dark morning, the great empire and the grief that came with it passed into the hands of the next generation. It passed to his son. And here is where you must pay close attention, because of those two names. The father, the one who was killed, was Eugenio Garza Sada. His son, nearly the same name, was Eugenio Garza Lagüera. Sada was the father, Lagüera was the son. One bloodline, two men, almost the same name. And it was the son, Eugenio Garza Lagüera, who took the grief of losing his father and turned it into one of the greatest fortunes in the Americas. He is the real architect of everything modern about this family's wealth. He inherited a great old industrial empire and he reshaped it into a modern consumer one. And he made two decisions, above all, that changed the whole story. The first was Coca-Cola. The family had long held the rights to bottle Coke in part of Mexico. Garza Lagüera looked at that unglamorous little business, mixing syrup, filling bottles, and saw something almost no one else did. He saw that if you could do it at a big enough scale, filling Coke was a license to print money, slowly but forever. So he grew it relentlessly. He bought up other bottlers, first across Mexico, then across the rest of Latin America, swallowing them one by one, region by region, country by country, until his company had become the single biggest Coca-Cola bottler on the entire planet. Not by luck. By patiently buying and building for decades. The second decision looked almost laughably tiny at the time. In 1978, he started a modest little chain of convenience stores, just a place to sell the family's own drinks and a few everyday odds and ends on Mexican street corners. He named it OXXO. Back then, it must have seemed like a minor side project, barely worth mentioning next to the great factories. Today, as I told you, that little chain of corner shops is the single most valuable jewel in the entire crown. The side project became the main event. So now, understand how a family actually gets this rich from something as everyday as a bottle of fizzy drink. Because it is not glamorous. It's arithmetic. On any one bottle of Coke, the profit is tiny, a few cents, perhaps even less. If you sold 100 bottles, you would barely notice the money in your pocket. It's nothing. But this family does not sell 100 bottles. They sell billions, every single year, across a dozen countries, decade after decade. And a few cents, multiplied by billions upon billions of bottles, over and over, year after year, for generations, quietly grows into one of the great fortunes of the modern world. That is the whole secret. There's no magic trick, no single lucky break. It is simply the patience to earn a few small cents, an unimaginable number of times, for more than 100 years. A game of pennies, played at a scale the human mind can barely picture. And this, really, is the family's entire philosophy, in miniature. Don't chase one big, exciting win. Find something small and boring and completely essential. A bottle of drink, a shop on a corner, that ordinary people will buy again and again and again for their whole lives. Then own the machine that supplies it, at the biggest scale you possibly can. And then simply wait. The money doesn't arrive in a thunderclap. It accumulates, drip by drip, like water filling a reservoir, until one day you look up and it's an ocean. Boring, they seem to have understood, is where the real money lives. Boring is beautiful. And there is one more move this quiet family made that tells you everything about how their minds work. Remember, this all began as a brewery. For more than a century, the family made beer. Famous Mexican beers, ones you may well have tasted yourself: Sol, Tecate, Dos Equis. Beer was in their blood. It was the very thing they were founded on. And then, in 2010, They did something that stunned people. They sold the entire beer business, the founding business, the heart of it. But look at how they sold it. They did not simply take a pile of cash and walk away. They handed their whole brewery over to the giant Dutch beer company Heineken, and in return, they took a huge slice of Heineken itself, about a fifth of one of the biggest brewers on the entire planet. Think about how cold and how brilliant that is. They stopped doing the hard daily work of brewing beer, and in one stroke, they became one of the largest owners of a far bigger global beer empire instead, quietly collecting a share of beer profits from all around the world without ever again having to run a single brewery themselves. They gave away the work and kept the winnings. And then, years later, when it suited them, they quietly sold off even that Heineken stake and rolled the money into their shops and their bottling and their new ideas. Nothing about it was sentimental. They had begun as brewers more than a century before, and they let the brewery go the moment a better deal came along, without so much as a backward glance. That is exactly how this family operates, quietly, unsentimentally, patiently, always trading up to something bigger and something calmer, and never falling in love with any single business enough to hold on to it past its time. So let's add it all together. The largest Coca-Cola bottler in the world by volume. More than 20,000 corner shops that a whole nation lives on. For years, a giant slice of the world's beer. Today, all told, a business that brings in something like $37 billion a year and operates across roughly 18 countries. And the people who control every bit of it, you would walk right past them on the street and never look twice. Think for a moment of the owners of the other great fortunes you know. The tech founders, the oil barons, the fashion dynasties. Their faces are on magazine covers, they argue on television, they post online, they give speeches. They are impossible to miss, and many of them want it exactly that way. Now hold this family up against them. They control the world's biggest Coca-Cola bottler, a nation's worth of corner shops, and a slice of the global beer trade. An empire that touches hundreds of millions of people's lives every single day. And there are barely any photographs of them. No interviews, no documentaries, no famous faces. They built one of the largest consumer empires in all of the Americas, and they did it in almost perfect silence. That contrast, once you notice it, is genuinely astonishing. The bigger they got, the quieter they became. Now, I have to be truly honest with you about something. And it matters. We genuinely do not know a great deal about this family, for the simple reason that they have worked very hard to keep it that way. But here is what we do know. The man who built the modern empire, Eugenio Garza Lagüera, died in 2008. And control of this vast fortune passed largely to his widow, a woman named Eva Gonda de Rivera, and to their 4 daughters. For years, the wealth counters at Forbes magazine ranked Eva Gonda as the single richest woman in all of Mexico. They estimated the family's fortune, at various points, as high as around $7 billion, and in more recent years, somewhere around $6 billion. In fact, in the very latest lists, as the company's shares dipped, they dropped her off the Billionaire's ranking altogether, which tells you exactly how much these numbers move around. Because I have to stress this hard, these are outside estimates. Guesses, really, calculated from the company's share price on a given day. The number rises and falls every single year, sometimes by $1 billion or more. Nobody outside the family truly knows what they're worth. And the family, of course, is not about to tell you. That is rather the point of being them. One Mexican newspaper, unable to learn much of anything about her, simply called Eva Gonda the mysterious richest woman in Mexico, which, honestly, sums the whole thing up. So now, at last, let me answer that puzzle I planted earlier. How does a low-profile family keep an unbreakable grip on a giant public company that anyone in the world can buy a piece of? The answer is a beautiful bit of financial machinery. Long ago, the founding families took their core shares and locked them away together inside a special trust. Think of it as a sealed vault. And they bound themselves to always vote as one single block. never against each other, always together. And, crucially, the shares inside that vault are a special kind that carry extra voting power, more say than an ordinary share. So here is the trick, and it is worth understanding, because the richest families in the world use versions of it all the time. The family might own only around a fifth of the company by pure value, just a fifth. But through that sealed trust and those special extra powerful shares, they control something like 70% of the votes that actually decide things. 70%. Read those two numbers again. A fifth of the money, but 70% of the power. Ordinary investors own most of the rest, and they happily collect their share of the profits year after year. But when it comes to who is truly in charge, who chooses the bosses, who sets the direction, who decides what the empire does next, the family, voting together as one unbreakable block, wins every single time. That is the answer to the puzzle. That is how you stay a tight, private dynasty while sitting on top of a huge, public company that anyone can buy into. You separate the money from the control. You let strangers own the profits. You never, ever let go of the votes. And control today passes, as quietly as everything else this family does, through marriage and through the next generation. One of the four daughters married a man named Jose Antonio Fernandez, who went on to run FEMSA for years and chairs it to this day. And their son has now in turn been named the company's newest chief, the fourth generation of this one dynasty to take the wheel. The professional managers change, the names on the office doors change, but behind them, the family's quiet grip never, ever loosens. There is a lesson buried in all of this, and it's the reason I find these stories so fascinating. We are taught, constantly, that wealth is loud, that it means fast cars, private jets, and your name in giant glowing letters. But some of the deepest, most durable money in the entire world is exactly the opposite of that. It is quiet, it is patient, it actively hides. We have told stories on this channel of proud families who fought each other out in the open, sued one another, and lost everything they'd built. Of loud men who flew too high, too fast, chasing fame as much as money, and came crashing down in flames. This family is the exact opposite of all of them. No public feuds, no scandals, no grand gestures, just 130 years of making almost no noise at all, and quietly, relentlessly, patiently winning. And maybe that is not a coincidence. Maybe the fighting and the flameouts and the noise are part of what destroys those other fortunes. And maybe the silence is part of what protects this one. As they might put it in Monterrey, the real fortune is built not in the noise, but in the quiet. And I'll be honest with you one final time. I cannot tell you what Eva Gonda and her four daughters are truly like, what they care about, how they spend their days, because almost no one outside their world can. And that is not a gap in the story. That is the story. They have spent a fortune and a century making certain of it. But here is a thought to carry away with you. This family is not finished, not even close. Their little OXXO shops are beginning to spread beyond Mexico now, into other countries and even into the United States. Their bottling machines reach a little further every year. They're moving into new things, even into helping people pay and save through their phones, right there at the OXXO counter. So it may well be that 10 years from now, on a shelf in some country far from Mexico, or in an app on your own phone, there will be a quiet touch of this family's empire, and you still won't know their name. So here is where we'll leave it. The next time you are somewhere warm, and you reach into a cooler, and you pull out an ice-cold bottle of Coca-Cola, when you feel the cold of the glass in your hand and you hear that little hiss as the cap comes off, I want you to do just one thing. Follow it backwards. That bottle came from a shop. The shop was stocked by a truck. The truck came from a bottling plant. And that plant does not belong to the famous American company whose name is printed on the label. It belongs to a quiet family in Monterrey, Mexico. A family worth billions of dollars whose name almost no one on earth knows. Once you have seen that, You can never quite unsee it again. Behind the loudest brands in the world, there is so often a silent family. There is a long, patient story. And if you look closely enough, there is a lesson. And the lesson is this: the people you see, the ones on the magazine covers, the ones shouting about how much they have, are very often not the ones who hold the real, lasting power. The real power, more often than you'd think, is sitting quietly on a corner in a city you've never visited, filling a bottle you drink without a thought, patiently collecting its few cents, 1,000,000,000 times over, and saying absolutely nothing at all. We'll see you with another one very soon.